Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Entertain This YouTube channel. As always, I am one of your hosts. I'm Alex.
And your other host here is Nick.
And this is You, Me, and Loki. Welcome back. Ladies and gentlemen, we've reached the end, the finale, the last chapter. Our journey has come to an end for now.
Or has it?
So let's just get right into the bacon. There's so much to talk about.
Right.
Nick, let's start with your initial thoughts going into this episode. We'll do kind of like a recap and what our expectations were before we get into the nitty-gritty.
Yeah, before we get into the bacon, as you said, Alex, you're right. This is the final episode of Loki, episode 6, for all time, always. I think both of us going into this, if you refer back to the previous episode, we had a lot of expectations, hopes, dreams, wants. And I don't know about you, but as we got closer to today, I started to waver a little bit on my hopes and dreams about where this is leading and what could potentially happen. Okay. I loved this episode. 9 minutes into it, I have it pulled up right now, so I can refer back to it if there's any questions that we have. 9 minutes into this episode, the big reveal happens. But we talked about it to some extent over the previous episodes, and I was like, well, could it be, just a cameo? Could it be, just a mention? What could it be? I cannot tell you, Alex, how much I loved this episode and what happened, because when it happens 9 minutes in, I paused my TV and I got up and I jumped and I ran around my apartment screaming, because I was like, they did it. They absolutely did it. As opposed to something like WandaVision and Falcon and the Winter Soldier, which, I mean, this is not to kind of cast disparaging comments to either of those shows, but we as fans going through those series had hopes, expectations, things that we thought they were teasing, and they didn't quite deliver on those things. So I was kind of scared that we were going to get into another one of those circumstances with Loki, and I was pleasantly surprised that not only did they answer and confirm the thing that I thought it would be, but they did it so overtly, where most of the episode is devoted to this reveal and the repercussions of this reveal and what it talks about. I loved this episode. I loved the actors. I loved the relationship between Sylvie and Loki and how that is twisted and explored a bit more. And we finally have a better handle and a more affirmative position on this new Loki. And what is going to happen now going forward in the MCU, just in general, this episode paved the way for it in great measure, and I am super excited for what comes next.
Yeah, for sure. Doing Yumi and Loki was this thought experiment that we had watching the second episode, because Nick and I were having these conversations anyway, as we were basically watching the first episode and into the second. And about halfway through our discussion of the second, I was like, you know what? Hold on. Let's record these. Let's put it on YouTube. And we've been kind of theorizing since then on what was going on, but now we have like a medium to record those theories and to speak out about them. And may I just say, I am so incredibly proud of us and our sleuthing abilities. We've referenced all walks of entertainment in the process of doing this, from the comic books to the movies to everything we've kind of looked at, compared, and talked about. And I think, I'm impressed by kind of how close we got. All of that being said, the reason why we had gotten so close is because since episode 1, there has been a clear path, and they gave very vague hints. In the long run, those aren't hints. It's all leading up to this grand reveal. We see it as hints because they release it 1 week at a time, something that other streaming platforms maybe look down on Disney Plus for doing, but it's this kind of hype and theorizing and social commentary and getting on social media and seeing what other people are thinking that is making watching these Marvel shows so much fun. And I think this is definitely a prime example of that happening live. Nick kind of talked about wavering on where we kind of thought this episode was going, and that is strictly due to like things that we've consumed through social media and listen to other people talk to us and listen to other people's different ideas on what's going on, and with all of them we're like, oh, that could be it. Oh yeah, that could be it.
TikTok
I really
guy
like
was
that.
dead wrong.
Yeah, there was a guy on TikTok. There's a guy on TikTok who, after watching one of his videos, we were like,
shit,
that might be it. But we didn't waver. We stayed with our hearts and our minds, and we held tight, and it led to a very satisfactory ending that we're going to discuss. But first, let's talk about that very first thing on our list.
We have Loki and Sylvie. They approach the infrastructure, the building, the castle, what have you. And all is eerie, all is quiet. We're all kind of waiting with bated breath as to what is going on here, who's behind all this, what's the answers here. But before we get to that, we are infiltrated in a very scary manner by Miss Minutes, who jumps out and startles us, the viewers, as well as Sylvie and Loki. And basically, the gist that I can remember is she's kind of trying to bargain with Sylvie and Loki to basically be like, all right, just turn around. Let's not even continue going this way to see who the man behind the curtain is. Loki, what do you want? You want to be king? We could take you back to Avengers timeline, the Battle of New York, and we could have you win. We could have you win the day. You could kill Thanos. You want to kill Thanos? Turning to Sylvie, do you want a childhood? We ripped that from you. Do you want to grow up and actually pursue your life's endeavors and your hopes and dreams? Do you guys want to share a timeline together? Do you guys want to do that? She's like, I know it's kind of a gray area, but we could make it work, right? So I think that was very interesting because it one could lead you to believe, Alex, that this maybe is going the way of that TikTok dude and his theory about what this actually is, and will Loki become king of Asgard and all these things, and will we see that alternate timeline, and will he pursue that thing? And we were reinforced with this at the end with Loki, but he's presented again with these dreams and ambitions and goals that he initially was after, the things that he was chasing when we first found him at the beginning of the season rather. And when confronted with the option to continue that and to have those things, he turns them down.
What I want to harp on with this Miss Minutes interaction is that from the very beginning, there was a theory throughout the fan community that Miss Minutes was evil, and that Miss Minutes knew all, and that Miss Minutes was above everybody, and it was confirmed in this episode. Miss Minutes actually does know everything.
I mean, she knows everything. I don't think that she's inherently nefarious, as I also don't think that the person that she is defending and like working alongside, which we'll get to that reveal, I don't think that person is particularly nefarious or villainous, but she did know more than she was leading on, and there was this hidden underlying current of what the TVA was doing and how they were doing it that she knew that was not presented to the TVA agents or us, the viewers, until now. Yeah.
So with all that being said, let's keep moving on down the episode. We are then brought back to the TVA as we see Ravona now standing in her office, kind of contemplating what to do next after the events of the last episode. And in strolls our man Mobius, who now is armed with one of those, I guess, like eraser batons?
Prune sticks.
Prune sticks is a good one. I like that. And when kind of threatening Ravona goes to call for backup from another agent, and the agent doesn't come. And very casually, Mobius says, I don't think that's going to work. And then he holds up the pen that we saw a couple episodes back, revealing that the pen is actually from the high school where Ravona, who at the time's name was Rebecca, we found out, was a high school principal. And now all of the TVA agents have further confirmation in their head that they are all variants and that none of it is real. Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts on all of this? It's all stuff we kind of already knew, but it kind of cements the end of the TVA in this timeline. because there's really no coming back from that.
Yes. Obviously, the notion of talking about the TVA in this timeline, that we will explore that as we get further along in this episode. But talking about what happened there with the revelation that Ravona is a variant and what that means to the rest of the TVA agents, we kind of aren't given too much as far as what we can surmise will happen next. We just know, we see that an agent discovers that. We don't see this widespread revolt and like awakening from the rest of the TVA agents as to like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that I'm a variant. Like, let's get out of here. Let's rise up. Like, we don't have that moment. The only thing that I would like to talk about and kind of posit as a question is Ravona escapes through one of the time doors, using a TemPad. She pushes back Mobius, and he's like, basically, where are you going? Her line is, in search of free will. Not much to, like you said, to kind of glean on as far as where she's going. I did toy with the idea that she knows and or works with, to some capacity, the aforementioned person that we will be talking about. But I don't quite think so. Now that I'm kind of looking at this, having removed myself from it for a few hours after watching it, I really do think that, and we might as well just kind of get this one thing out of the way, just so that we can maybe speak a little more candidly. Yeah. This is just the showrunners basically saying like, and we'll see her in season 2, because it's confirmed that we're going to get a season 2. So this just seems like, hey, let's just give you guys a little bit of information, kind of have a conversation with her, and then we're going to have her exit the rest of the episode in this season. We'll pick up with her later, but we're going to leave you with this very ambiguous line of like, in search of free will. What does that mean? Well, we'll find out later at some point. So let's talk about why this episode kind of stirs the pot more on that revelation, and just the general notion that the next phase of where the MCU is going to explore post Infinity Saga is this idea of the multiverse and multiple timelines and worlds and heroes. And that is basically introduced to us with the reveal of someone called He Who Remains. Alex, talk about that a bit. We're now in there. Let's get to it.
So let's talk first from a comic book nerd perspective. He Who Remains has appeared in Marvel Comics probably since like the earlier days, probably like the Silver Era, which is sort of 70s, 80s. 90s was a little more grunge, so this is like 70s, 80s. He Who Remains was the guy who made the Timekeepers, the actual living flesh Timekeepers from the comics. So honesty there, this He Who Remains also created the Timekeepers, but animatronic robot versions controlled by somebody. Now, we had talked in the last episode about how they all laughed at the same time. They all were saying the same things at the same time. One of them said, "See you soon." It was kind of whispered. And it was kind of revealed to us who that is. Now, I do want to talk that He Who Remains is an old, decrepit man in the comic books. He is an ex-TVA agent who has lived through everything and now is the last living person at the end of time, He Who Remains. And he watches over the timeline to ensure that it makes it to this ending, creates the Timekeepers to make sure that happens, so on and so forth. That is not the case here. He Who Remains in this version is none other than Kang the Conqueror. He's never referred to by name as Kang the Conqueror, but he is we know he's casted as Kang. He refers to himself as the Conqueror at one point. And we know that he's in a different universe. We got that from the beginning of the episode, where we're listening to like almost every line delivered in every MCU movie ever play at the exact same time, and your brain's like, yeah! But it like zooms out of the universe, and like it shows like Peter Quill's like spaceship as they're going out, and they're like, you're going further and further out of this universe. And then we see the Marvel Cinematic Universe sitting there, and then we pivot a bit to the right, and there's a second universe, and we zoom in there, and it's Loki and Sylvie at the door, to show they've now traveled to a different universe where this is happening.
That's a good connection.
Now, that all being said, this man sitting on this other universe, Kang the Conqueror, he claims that he is the one who made the TVA, and he's protecting the timeline for certain reasons. And there's this long conversation in the office where he basically explains he was a scientist from the 31st century who discovered string theory, basically. In our universe, it's known as string theory, which is the idea of multiple universes, each connected by basically a string, and every event that occurs can create another universe, and it goes on forever like that. Schrodinger's cat experiments with this, trying to prove that there's a universe where the cat's alive and the cat's dead, and they happen simultaneously until they are forced into one junction. It's string theory. It's crazy. There are TED Talks on it. You can look them up. But the basic that you need to understand is that multiple universes happen at multiple points. And through this event, this maybe first ever Nexus event, he discovers it and then is able to traverse it. And in doing so, he meets himself in millions and millions and millions of timelines. And at first, it's very cordial, and they're all congratulating each other. But then slowly, we start to see Kang as Kang the Conqueror. He wants to be the one on top. He wants to be the one in charge. He wants to be the one controlling it all, even from himself. So, because of that, an all-out war breaks out, we are to understand. And this war is devastating. It kills multiple, timelines. And to finally end the war, the one who remains claims that he narrows the timeline down to one timeline, and he keeps it that one timeline. That way, no other versions of him can exist, and that's basically it. But then he leads us to believe that the risk in all of this is that if he were to fall, another version of him would show up. And that doesn't really make sense, because there's a lot to poke holes into this scene and what gets set up and whether or not he's telling the truth, what all is going on here. We'll get into all that, but I want to hear what you think of this first, because I'm sure you have a lot.
I mean, obviously, I was super pleased to see this happen, and as early as it did, and for as much of this episode to be dedicated to, quite honestly, our main heroes sitting down for a conversation while this guy just waxes lyrically and basically does an exposition dump, but in such a very creative and fresh way. I mean, Jonathan Majors is a terrific talent, and he doesn't make all of this information overload boring, and it's all told very well. Now, as far as the mechanics of it, there is this whole notion that he's also lying too. I mean, Sylvie constantly is like, "You're lying. This can't be true," or whatever. And Loki initially kind of feels the same way, but then as we kind of further along in the episode, he starts to kind of turn around, being like, "We really need to weigh the pros and cons here." It's like, if this guy's telling the truth, what?
Let's talk about that moment. Because this is hinted to earlier in the series, when Loki comes to the realization that his quick thinking actually got his mother killed at one point.
Yes.
He had experienced that trauma of sending the troops in the wrong direction and it ending in one of his loved ones dying. And his coping with that has made him, we see this character development, it's made him more conscious of his own actions and the importance of deeper thought in your actions.
Kang, as we understand him here, which we don't even know necessarily if he is Kang 1, like the origin point, 31st century original Kang. There's no telling, right?
Right.
But like I said earlier, he's not necessarily nefarious or villainous. He's not to the extent of, kidnapping people through the TVA and making them work for him to basically keep things in order. That's a bit messed up. But outside of that, he
does not partake in free will or the idea of it. He doesn't care for it.
Sure. So on that, he gets a couple points docked. But he's basically alluding, he's like, "Hey, man, everything is in control. I know everything." That's another thing that he mentions that's really exciting, is that he basically pulls out these sheets of paper, like we saw in the first episode of Loki, being like, "Hey man, I got this all scripted out. I know exactly what you guys are going to say, and that's why I'm able to kind of telegraph your moves, because I know where this is leading." Which I think is a really, not only is it a powerful, sort of prescience power that he has. But I think it also just kind of speaks to what our characters are dealing with, and this idea of free will and what his threat could potentially be. And he's basically pleading, being like, hey, you guys, you could like let me go and I'll just go kind of live my life, and you guys can assume my role, manage the TVA, everything will be Gucci, I'll just retire ostensibly. Or if you guys want to kill me, you can, but something more worse than me basically will take my place. And that leads me to believe that he has such a control on everything that's going on as far as the multiple timelines and everything like that, after basically wrangling all the Kangs that were like causing calamity. I think he put everything in a checks and balance situation. And if you were to remove him from the equation, that provides an opening for these other Kangs and all these other infinite possibilities to arise, which could eventually lead into another multiversal war. And those are the stakes. He's like, this is what you're playing around with. So like, if you kill me, go for it. And I don't, pardon Alex, I hate to immediately jump here, but we should talk about this. Sylvie stabs Kang.
Yeah.
And not only that, the last thing that he basically says is, I'll see you again here soon, basically.
That was the last line that the timekeeper said too as they died. I'll see you soon.
Oh, that's what the timekeeper said?
They whisper it.
Oh, interesting. Something that I saw in the episode, I know that we're kind of getting close to the end here, but there's a moment in this interaction with Kang where he kind of stops for a moment.
What happens is they reach the end of time that they keep referring to. The end of the time that the timekeeper knew. As they're sitting there, the timeline ends. And he goes, oh, I don't know what happens next. This is as far into the future as I've ever seen. Everything I've known up until this point, I've shown you the documents. I know all of this. And then it hit a point while he's sitting there, and he's like, oh, this is it.
Now
I
we've
don't
reached
know
the
anything
end
anymore.
Right, so
This
now
is
we're
the
basically
end.
writing new material as we go.
There's one more thing that I want to touch on before we jump off. And it's Loki and Sylvie, they kiss. Nick, you pointed out, and I think this is totally fair, that to Loki, this was the big build-up. Like, this was the relationship moment. This is proof to him that, like, him and Sylvie can work out, and everything he's been feeling is justified in this moment. But for Sylvie, this was a tactical move to get closer to Kang's desk where his bracelet was. His bracelet that also acts as a tempad. And when she grabs it, she opens up a door and pushes Loki through and says to him, he's like, you're just like me, this, that, and the other. She says, but I'm not you, and pushes him into this time door. And it's a moment of betrayal, and it's very sad. But I take that literally. I literally think she means, I'm not a Loki. I'm not you. As much as like I've been pretending to be you this whole time, I'm not you. And that's something in season 2 that I think we're going to explore too. But Loki goes falling through the door, and do you want to pick up on where he falls into and what that could mean?
Yes, you'll probably have more insights on this than I. But basically, he falls in, he's back at the TVA. He's very distraught, very upset of just this 180 that he's been taken on with Sylvie. And knowing the decision that she's made. So back at the TVA, he goes to warn Mobius and Hunter B-15 that, yo, hey, by the way, there's this guy, he's in charge, he's got really crazy power, like something crazy is about to happen, like Sylvie's doing something, and they are reacting to him weirdly, and they presume him to be a TVA worker. They're like, you're acting crazy, like let's get you back to your office. Like they call him, I think, like an analyst or something. And he like turns and looks out into the main courtyard sort of assembly area of the TVA. And instead of the traditional timekeeper statues that we've seen previously throughout this season, it is a statue of Kang. So we are now in a different TVA, in a different reality, because Mobius and Hunter B-15 have no recollection of Loki in this manner. They just see him as another worker. And Kang is out in the open, clearly in charge, and just raises a lot of questions. And I'm honestly super interested and excited to see where this goes. I don't have any overarching theories as to where we're going with this, other than I'm just very interested.
Yeah. This does confirm that there is a second TVA, and thus a second form of all of these characters. They don't know who Loki is, though, so weirdly enough, the whole Loki variant problem doesn't exist in other TVAs. What that means story-wise, I guess, is that Loki just follows what he's supposed to do in this branch. The way that I see it is these are the thicker branches. There's the big trunk of the tree that is the like creation of the universe, and then all the smaller branches that go out. And I guess at one of those like thickest points of that thick branch is where the TVA is built, and any variant Lokis come off of that branch into their own smaller branches that have to be pruned. That's just the rules that I'm trying to establish for the MCU canon on how all this works. But the Kang that we have been talking to this entire episode would like us to believe that there was only ever one branch, and that there's only one TVA, and that he is protecting that one TVA. He says that's his duty. That's how he's stopped the multiversal war, is by basically getting rid of all of the other universes that had other Kangs. But there's, like, a lot of problems with that, because if there's another TVA and there's another Kang, then that Kang probably believes either the same thing or is in cahoots with the Kang that we know, and it's almost confirmation that Kang in this episode was lying the whole time. There wasn't, maybe there wasn't a universal war. Maybe all the Kangs just agreed that they all wanted to conquer a timeline, and because of this, they all got a timeline and took control of it and decided to stay out of the other Kang's way so that they could all conquer these timelines. The other thing is our Kang was hiding from the actual multiversal war that is constantly going on, and the only way he could hide was to keep his timeline from branching into those that were involved in the multiversal war.
Okay.
That is to say, the multiversal war continues. He's just escaped it, and now, since he's been killed, the Marvel Cinematic Universe that we know will now join this war that was already going on. Maybe that's where we'll see Multiverse of Madness. Maybe that's where we'll see the technology that allows you to jump into other universes be used by all of the Marvel Universe. We just don't know. I think we're going to get a lot more answers in these upcoming films, and especially in season 2 of Loki, for sure.
Definitely. Well, let's leave this with our final thoughts. Like I said, I loved this episode, and I think stepping back, looking at the entire series as a whole, this is easily my favorite of the MCU television shows yet. I think that this does a great job of characterizing Loki and evolving that character. And I initially was kind of worried about, like, he's dead. Why are we doing this again? Like, bringing him back. They just are kind of scrapped for ideas. But this obviously all has intent and purpose. And I'm very, very excited to see where they go with this in season 2, because clearly, it will kind of depend on when season 2 comes, because right now the next time that we know for certain we're going to see Kang again is in 2023 with the new Ant-Man film. So will season 2 take place between that, like actual like release time, or will it be after that, and will it fill in gaps leading into it? Because Marvel kind of jumps around on like how they present timeline information and stuff like that. So release order is basically the way that we have to follow these things. Super excited, cannot wait. Sucks that it's over, but the next Marvel series and movie is but a month away, so we don't have to wait too much longer.
Yeah. My final thoughts are, there are a lot of questions. There's a lot of information left up in the air. That's purposeful. I commend them for greenlighting the season 2, because it's what the fans want. We all want that season 2. So we're glad that it's coming. I'm excited to see what happens next and to get those explanations that we're looking for. I think that is it. This is not the end of You, Me, and Loki that we thought that it was going to be, because there's a season 2. So there will be a season 2 of You, Me, and Loki as well. So be excited for that as we move forward. In the meantime, we don't want to stop making these kind of discussion-based videos, so we'll be picking up some other Marvel stuff as we go. So be looking forward to that too. So I guess until next time that we see ya.
For all time, always.